Um, my name is Kelly and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Kelly.
Our speaker today, um, is someone that, one of many faces that I have seen from day one. There and just a solid person who's always there. Doesn't necessarily always have a lot to say, but when he does, I listen. Um, he has a lot of sobriety under his belt, and he has a lot of experience, strength, and hope to share with our group today. And I am privileged to introduce Major. All right.
Well, Major, I'm a drunk. Call myself a drunk because I couldn't say the word alcoholic when I got here. I couldn't actually speak when I got here, but even when I couldn't say the word alcoholic. So it was too difficult for me to say. So I called myself a drunk. And so that's why I still call myself drunk today, because I remind myself of where I came from and what I was like when I first got here. So when I started out as a child, I had four nightmares that all came true, and all of them had to do with addiction. Almost, is invariably it was something that, I mean, I could not even speak yet. I was not old enough to speak when I started. Those are my first four memories of my life. And one of the addictions that I was fighting against that when I was dreaming was alcoholism. And, so I started out that way, I guess. I obviously was born with it, apparently. So, been battling with it, when I drank, just like everyone else, when I first started drinking, it allowed me to be less self-aware, less self-conscious, took away a little of that fear so that I could actually, uh, you know, converse with other people without being so uh, self-conscious of myself and fumble over your words and all that, and nervous or whatever when you're dealing with other people. And so that's what the first thing it took from me was fear. That's what it took. All right. But the problem is it kept on taking and taking and taking until it takes everything you love, everything you want, everything you hope for, all your friendships and your loved ones from you. And that's what alcoholism does, and so for me, I started out, I think my first drink was like when I was about 12 or 13 or something like that. And I started drinking pretty heavy after that. But the first thing that I noticed was, like I said, it took that fear. And then it didn't start taking relationships until later on in life. But I was a happy drunk. That's what I was. I mean, I was always a happy drunk, and I was always pretty crazy. I was going to go have fun, and all this. And that's the way I kind of lived. And because of it, I made friends and I made enemies, because I was always very exuberant, and I was not one of those drunks that sits and drinks and then passes out. I want to go do something when I got drunk, and that's kind of the way I drank. But as a result of that, I also ended up with a lot of trouble. I ended up with trouble with people and stuff like that. And I ended up getting kicked out of every bar in the county I lived in, and I didn't know they had a list until I was on it. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't know that they had a list. I was one of the unwanted in the county. That's what I looked at now. Instead of being on the most wanted list, I was on the most unwanted list. So it was really kind of crazy because I didn't feel like I deserved that at all, but at the same time, it happened. And so ended up drinking alone a lot. I mean, I'd go get a whiskey and go fishing somewhere and just be alone. It was easier than dealing with people. And so I kind of, that's the way I lived it, the last of my drinking. It was pretty tragic. I mean, I didn't, I had no place to live at the very, very last. But, it's like, I'd like to say, I had a resolve to stay drinking. And I mean, I did, because that's the only thing I could say, because I was unemployed for a year and a half and stayed drunk every day. Well, that takes resolve, I would say. you know. But anyway, so I can use that resolve, that same stubbornness to stay sober and clean. If I can do that for a year and without working and stay drunk every day, I can use that same thing to stay sober and clean. And that's what I do every day. So that the biggest motto that I gather from Alcoholics Anonymous is, no matter what. It doesn't matter what I feel, doesn't matter what I think, stay sober no matter what. And that's why sometimes, the best thing I could do is just go to bed. You know what? I'm trying to stay sober till I go to bed at night. Well, maybe I'll just go to bed early. I've done that several times. I remember doing that quite a few times when I first sobered up. And that's what I was taught. Stay sober until you go to bed, and that's what it's about. Because if you stay sober till you go to bed, that means you won that day. You won today. Doesn't mean that everything went right, because a lot of times things go wrong, but you stay sober anyway. I remember early on in my sobriety when one of the guys that I had a month sobriety, and this dude asked me to sponsor him. And I said, I don't know nothing. What do you want me to sponsor him for? And anyway, he was inspired by my commitment to staying sober just today. And that's what he said. But anyway, when I first got sober, I had to be, because when I got down on my knees on the street corner and asked God for help. And this guy, when I asked God for help, I didn't make any conditions. I didn't say, I'm gonna, go to church or be a pastor or do anything like that, or whatever. I didn't make any commitments. I just said, God, I need help. That's it. I just need help. And I got up and walked 2 blocks, and this guy that passed me by 100 times act like he didn't see me, looking at the clouds or whatever. But anyway, he stopped and asked if I needed a ride. I got in, and I really didn't have much place to go. But anyway, he said, "You're pretty drunk. You want to go to detox?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "A place they sober you up." Wow, that was quick, God. It was like, and then I said, "Okay," but it didn't even sound. When I said okay, it didn't sound like me. It sounded like somebody else said okay. So I'm still not real sure if I said okay or if there was some help there. But anyway, so I ended up going to detox, and I was really bad. For some reason, I didn't have any blackouts when I was drinking. I never had any blackouts. I never passed out anywhere unless I just kind of needed to sleep or whatever. But anyway, but when I quit drinking, I had a lot of problems. I had a lot of problems. My body had a lot of problems with me quitting drinking. So when I went to detox on the 3rd day, I wasn't able to speak. And so on the 3rd day that I was there, I finally found my ID and showed the lady what my name was on the 3rd day. I finally found my ID. It was in my wallet. I didn't put it there, but I guess when I got there, somebody was afraid I was going to lose it, so they took it out of my pocket and put it in my wallet. That's why I couldn't find it. I put my wallet in my backpack, so that's why I couldn't find it. But anyway, I had to show someone my ID, but that went on for 6 months, because for the first 6 months of my sobriety, I couldn't speak. I couldn't talk at all most of the time. Sometimes I could speak a little bit, but I couldn't really talk most of the time. And so I would carry my ID in my pocket and just loosen my pocket. And somebody asked me my name, I could show them my ID, so they would know my name. And I got used to doing that, and I got that from a lady in the program suggest that to me, and that's what I did, and so I was pretty messed up when I first got sober. And my first sponsor was a woman. She said, "I'm your sponsor." I said, "Okay." she lived downstairs from where I was staying at. And so anyway, and she got committed into a mental institution because, hers was a very, very sad story, very sad story. She was not allowed to go to school at all until the neighbor seen her in through the window and she waved at the neighbor, and the neighbor said, "I've never seen a kid playing out there." And so she called it in, and she was taken out of that house, and she was like 14 years old and never allowed to go to school or do anything. She was in the house her whole life, never allowed to go to school or learn anything. Very, very sad story. She had like 7 personalities, and they found a little girl, and so they were able to help her. So I was glad to see her go to get the help she needed, But there's one thing that she taught me. You know what she taught me? I couldn't read or write, so she taught me to go to big book studies. She'd say, "Go to big book studies." So I went to big book studies, and that's how I learned how to read. I learned how to read by going to big book studies and following along, and I'd lose where they're at, ask somebody, "Hey, where are you guys at?" And so I could follow along because I could read a little bit. I could if, but, when, stuff like that, And so I that's how I learned how to read. And I went on after 6 years of sobriety, and I got my high school diploma. So that took a lot of work, but I memorized the big book. I memorized the 12 by 12 because it's so very hard for me to read it that I had to memorize it. So that's what I did. And somewhere along the lines, people started calling me Big Book Thumper when I was early in my sobriety, and I was one that was very rigid on following the program, and I felt like I had to. Because I remember 6 months sober. I went into the doctor's office 6 months sober, and I was going to show the doctor. I just got the chip, my 6 months chip the day before. I was going to show the doctor, and I got there and I couldn't speak. And the doctor said, "Well, if you survive from your alcoholism," and I don't remember what else he said. That's all I remembered. When he said that, if I survive. I didn't even show him my shit at all. But if I survive, so I'm like, man, my life is still in jeopardy. I'm 6 months sober, and my life is still in jeopardy. I ain't made it yet. You know what I mean? And so when I looked at that, and I thought, wow, that's kind of scary stuff. Because one of the things I was telling the doctor after that, I told him what happened to me when I first got sober. And he said, "You're very fortunate you're alive. And if you take another drink, you probably die." And that's what he told me. From what you told me, you'll probably die if you take another drink. And I believed him, and I still believe that that's true. I stayed sober since my first meeting, but it took me a little while to get there. I went through detox, and I got out of detox. And this guy, I was staying in this shelter, and this guy talked me into drinking with him. And he knew I had some money somehow. And anyway, I went in to a bar and bought, the 40-ounce torpedoes. That's what we used to call them. But anyway, I bought like 6 of them. And I went in, and I borrowed the dime for the last one. I borrowed a dime from the bartender to get the last one. I was walking out thinking, man, this is not going to be enough for 2 guys. That's what I was thinking when I walked out. I walked out, and the guy goes, "I only wanted one." I had to physically think to close my mouth. "You only wanted one? What? I was worried about it being enough. This guy only wants one." And God said to me right then and there's a difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. And I went down, and we drank underneath this viaduct down by the water, and he drank about that much. Goes, "Oh no, I gotta leave. I'm starting to feel it." "You don't like the way it feels to drink?" "Oh no, I just like to feel a little bit, then I gotta go." He left. God says there's a difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. I went, wow. Being a good alcoholic, I couldn't dump it all out. Well, you know that. So I said, I committed to myself that day. I said, they told me about that AA meeting, 7 o'clock tomorrow, in the evening. And tomorrow I'm going to that AA meeting. So I did. I went to that first AA meeting and I've been sober ever since. I got sober the day after April Fool's Day. I said, I'm sick and tired of being a fool. I don't want to be a fool anymore. So I'm going to go to that AA meeting tomorrow. And I remember saying that to myself, you know, and this sobriety has probably been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, to stay sober and clean through everything I've been through. But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. You know, everything I have is a result of my sobriety. Because God saved me from death, you know, and God sustains my life. And I have to remember that. And it's written in the big book. You know, when we talk about the big book, how it works and all that, you know, there's so many passages in this book that are very, very important to me and very important to my sobriety. I'd like to point out a few. You know, I remember my sponsor told me to read from 83 to the end of the chapter every day. And the whole program is in that part of the book. It starts out with the promises and it just goes on. And that it's like everything that we do is written in there. You know, it talks about in here that my sobriety is no thought or effort on my part. It just comes because God's doing the work. See, I got here by grace. I didn't get here because I deserved to be here. I got here by grace. I didn't get in here under my power. Neither do I stay here under my power. It's God giving me grace. You know, and that's the reason why I'm here. It's not here because I work a great program and all these things that I do. You know, there it talks about, you know, nothing saves a day like working with another person. I'll tell you what, there after you got sober and after I worked the steps, you know what? I've been doing 10, 11, and 12, but I haven't done any other step. I haven't repeated a fourth step or something like that. I mean, I do 10, 11, 12. If you do it properly, you don't ever have to do another fourth step. But you know what? You'll do it over again. You know how every time you sponsor someone. Every time you sponsor somebody and talk to them about the program, you're doing it over and over again all the time. And you keep that fresh in your mind. It talks about in the big book that and recovery is an active part of my mind. If that's the reason why, like people, I follow around people, talk to people when they go out, and I found one thing in common. Always stop going to meetings. That's the first thing they say, right? Stop going to meetings. You know, I rarely ever find anyone that has been going to meetings every day and then went out and got drunk. It does happen. It does happen. It does happen, but not very often. Not very often. You know, one of the scariest stories I ever heard was this man. His daughter passed the bar exam and became a lawyer. He went to her party and somebody pushed the beer his way. He drank 2 of them. Said, wait a minute, I'm in recovery. I'm not supposed to be drinking. What the heck am I doing? Drank coffee for an hour, drove down Sprague Avenue in Spokane, not too far from here. Drove down Sprague Avenue, looked to change his radio, and 3 women were out partying and tried crossing the street and hit all 3. One died on the scene. One died on the way to the hospital, and the other one has results of the accident for the rest of her life. They threw the book at him. It's one of the cases that they used to lower the blood alcohol limit to 0.8. I think it's even lower than that now. But they used his case to do that, and you know, he's in. Like he had 2 consecutive life sentences for 2 drinks, you know, 2 drinks. That's what he did. You know, I met another man, he had 7.5 years of sobriety, and he was in the meeting. I was in this kind of actually tipped me off at the time. But anyway, he was in this meeting and he was jubilant, he was telling jokes, he was at this meeting, the meeting I went to that night, next morning, blues ran. That kind of ticked me off. What the heck? So I went and I investigated. I tried finding out and I finally, and he had two sponsors, neither one of them knew what was going on, why he did. I talked to all kinds of people in the program. I finally got to his sister, and his daughter had committed suicide a month earlier. And he committed suicide because of his part in her life. But the truth is, he was hurting. He was 7.5 years sobriety. He was hurting, and he was never honest with anyone. He never told anyone what was really going on. And that is one of the worst things you can ever do in sobriety. If you're going through something and not tell anyone, that is so very difficult. You know, I sponsored this guy. I only think I had maybe 9 years or something like that. He had 29 years. He asked me to sponsor him. But I heard the guy talk. I said, well, I haven't, I can't really tell you anything new about the program or something like that, but I could certainly be there for you. So anyway, he went through, his wife got cancer, and she was in the hospital for the entire time mostly. And he, as a result of being there all the time, lost his business. And then anyway, his wife died in 6 months. And then he ended up losing his house because he couldn't support it, lost his house and his car and his wife. 2 months later, 2 months after she died, his daughter came down with the same cancer. Same kind of cancer, was dead in a month. And this was the daughter he was staying with. And I've seen him go through that. And God prepares us. Sometimes not in ways we perceive. But God prepares us for life. He prepares us all the time. And I watched him go through that, and he did a lot of crying. And I did my best to support him in his sobriety and help him along and help him just stay strong. And then about 8 months after that, my dad had a head injury. And he was going up and down in the hospital. They kept saying, well, he might get 40% back, he might get 80% back, he may not recover at all. They didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And he was up and down for 3 years. And then finally, at the end, he had an allergy towards the medicine that they were giving him. And his skin, they had synthetic skin, and his skin fell off. His skin burnt off his face, off his body. It was such a bad allergy. And so anyway, and it looked, my dad looked like horror film. Like I'd seen the synthetic skin fall off. That was horrifying. So all this time that I'm going through that, I said, you know what? Sandy did it. Sandy stayed sober anyway. He went through all that. He stayed sober anyway. I can do it. And sometimes that's the best is that, you know what? I see you guys go through all kinds of things and you stay sober anyway. That's a winner. It's not somebody that gets knocked down or not somebody that is left standing, somebody that gets back up, even though they got knocked down. It's a win, right? And so a lot of times in my sobriety, I've had to go through things. I've had to go through a lot of things. I lost my mom and my dad and my brother and a lot of other people to death. Death is one of those things. I figured out after going through death and then studying what I went through. I'm a study type person. But anyway, I went through and I studied, the grieving. And I figured out when I got sober, I was grieving alcohol. I was grieving over my alcohol use like it was a person. I didn't realize that I was grieving over it, but that's what I was doing. I was grieving over the lifestyle that I had and the alcohol and those things that it did for me like it was a person. And so I was going through that when I was getting sober, and I didn't even know. But grieving is one of those things, you go through the process of grieving And, you start debating and anger and all that stuff, and you finally get to acceptance. But the problem is that if you ever look up the four phases of grieving, even when you go down and you have accepted it, it doesn't mean it's done. It means that you'll go through it again. You'll go through it again and again until it's done. I look at it as, the same ways. Uh, the depth that I love a person is the same depth that I take everything they do, including death. So if I'm walking down the street and somebody I don't know yells out the car door, F you, you could just brush that off easy. Yeah, whatever, have a good day. But if your wife or husband or somebody that's you love says that to you, that hurts because of the depth of love that you have for them. And so the depth that you love someone is the depth you take everything they do, good or bad. That means the great good things are great, right? Those good things, they're really good. And the bad things are really bad. That's why we have broken relationships and all the things that we go through. I have to point out, I was at the lowest spot of my life when I called out to God and asked for God for help. And God answered me. God answered me right away. And, I tell the story, I haven't told it in a long time, but if you go by Albertsons over here or any store, you see somebody that has a sign says need food, anything helps, God bless. And you have 10 people that go by that person and don't give them anything. And 3 of them act like they didn't see him. They didn't even see him. 3 people go by and say, well, maybe somebody else will help. I'm busy today. And we have all these people that go by them, and some people go by them and pity them with their lips, but still don't give them anything. All right? Oh, you poor thing. But still don't give them anything. And the 11th person walks by and gives them $5. What's the difference? All of them saw the sign, all of them knew why he was there. The difference is because of the principles that person is living by. It's not because that person's need, it's not because he's there, it's because of the principles that person's living by. That's how God gives grace to us. That's how God gives grace to us, not because of who we are, not because of what we've done, but because of who he is. God proves he is good to us by being good to us. That's how God proves he is good to us. And this program is a great testimony of that. God will accept you right where you're at, no matter where you're at, no matter what you've done. And I absolutely know that. I absolutely know that because it happened to me. God accept me right where I'm at, no matter where I'm at, no matter what I've done. It's like I tried to quit drinking before I quit drinking, and I tried to change my behavior by changing my behavior. God allowed me to quit drinking. You know how? He changed my heart. God changes my heart, and as a result, I don't want to do that. So I can try and change my behavior, but God can change my heart. And when he changes my heart, I'm able to stay sober because I will do anything to stay sober. It is my will and my right to stay sober. It is your will and your right to stay sober. There's no one in this room that can get me drunk. But you know what? If I wanted to get drunk, there's no one in this room can keep me sober either. How many times you ever try and help somebody in the program? If you've been in the program very long and you try to help somebody and they don't want your help. No, I don't want your help. I'm not going to listen to anything you say. And there's nothing you can do to get that person sober if they're determined to get sober. Get drunk or sober. It's all up to us. The first thing I have to do is commit to staying sober and clean today. That's what they told me. 24 hours at a throw, right? That's what they told us when we first got here. 24 hours of a throw, at a throw. One of the things I was gonna try and find on here, um, okay, so we will see that our new attitude towards alcohol has been given to us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes, that's the miracle of it. That is God doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Over and over, I find that, it's God changing my heart, changing my mind, continuing with me day by day. And God's helping me to stay sober and clean every single day. And it's not something I did. It's not something I did, it's something I received. See, sobriety, when you talk to somebody about staying sober and you try and, talk to them about working the steps and all that, you can pretty much tell, but not always, if that person is going to actually work the program or not. Most of the time, you can tell right away because of their attitude towards it. But there are some times when I've sponsored this guy for 10 years, he kept going to get drunk over and over and over again. And he was very remorseful and sorry and trying. I don't understand why I can't stay sober. 10 years he went through this. He went over and over and over and over again. And he stayed sober for a month. He was stayed sober for almost 2 years one time. And then he had a birthday, and went and got drunk again. But every time, and I never gave up on him. And he said, "Well, you're the only one that's still helping." And I never gave up on him. You know why? Because God never gave up on me. And God never gave up on me, and I'm living by his example. And so I just kept on helping him. And I kept praying to God, how can I help this person? I don't know how to help this person. And so anyway, finally came down, and he did not feel like he was worthy of God's love at all. He felt like he was unworthy of any kind of, not just love, any kind of reward, any kind of good thing. He thought he should die or something, And so anyway, and it all came from his wrong view of God. It all came from his wrong view of God. See, he thought God was out to get him for everything he did wrong. And God is out to help you out of everything you do wrong. So it's like God is here to help us, not to condemn us. And sometimes our wrong view of God can hurt us. It talks about, let's see here. I can find it. I marked it somewhere. Let's see. Well, talks about in the program that they say there's no must. There's no must in the program. There's just suggestions, right? And there's actually some must in the program. There is. There is some must in the program. And I know I marked it. I can't find it right now. But anyway, there is a must in the program. I can't even find it right now. So, and we have ceased fighting everything and everyone, even alcohol, for by this time, in what does it say? Sanity has returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as a hot burner. When I look at that, we cease fighting everything, or sanity has returned. Teaches us in the big book over and over and over again that it is insane for me to drink. It is insanity. And when I look at my life and all the things that happened to me as a result of alcoholism, it is insanity for me to entertain drinking again. That is insane thinking. And it teaches me that, because I tell you what, it's just like when I drank, I didn't get in trouble every time I drank. I didn't get in fights every time I drank. But every time I got in trouble, I was drunk. You've heard that before in AA meetings all the time. and it's true because I had a lot of good times, but every time I got in trouble, I was drunk. I had my sister when I first got sober. My sister said, "Oh, you were a lot more fun when you were drinking." You know, well, it probably was because I was when I got sober, I had to get sober, and so sometimes it's hard in sobriety to have a little humor, you know. But every time I speak, I'm a cold person. I'm always cold most of the time. But every time I speak, I get really hot. It must be all the hot air. Oh, come on. So anyway, um, so the thing about sobriety, I sponsor with tons of people over and over again. I believe I could teach anyone this program, and it's just whether or not you're willing to learn and follows directions. That's what, when I was first sober, I remember talking to the old timers. And these are people with like 40, 50 years and stuff. And I'd talk to them and I'd ask them what they did because I wanted to know how do you stay sober that long. So I asked them what they did. You know what I always got? Simple, very simple practices of this program. Very simple, simplify things. I was complicating the heck out of it. You know why? You know how I know? My sponsor told me that. He said, "Man, you complicate the heck out of stuff." Well, it was about a week later. I had to go to the bathroom and I was laying in bed and I was comfortable. I'll just wait. So then later on, I thought, oh man, I really got to go now. And I got out of bed and somebody got to the bathroom before me. And I realized, you know what? I just complicated a trip to the bathroom. He was right. Dang it. I complicated a trip to the bathroom. The thing, one of the things that I loved about AA when I first got sober is that I had to learn how to laugh again. I couldn't laugh when I got in. I was so hurt in my heart, and that I couldn't laugh because I remember my uncle died about 6 months before I got sober. My uncle died, and I loved my uncle, and I always wanted to be like him. And I looked at my life and I said, I'm nothing like it, and that hurt. And I remember feeling that way. But when I got sober and clean, I started realizing that, you know what? This is actually working. This is actually working. I remember now, I'm going to date myself. I know I've been sober a long time, but I got sober in '88. But anyway, I bought a Pinto station wagon. Right? I bought a Pinto station wagon and I couldn't even get it home. I was driving, and anyway, it caught on fire. I thought it was smoke. I didn't think it was smoke. I thought it was steam coming out of the hood, right? So anyway, I pull up to the service station and I pop the hood and flames come flying out. Oh shoot! Somebody gets me a extinguisher. I try to put it out with that. That didn't happen. Somebody else apparently called the fire truck because here comes the fire truck, and they put it out. And you know what? I'm sitting there. The only thing I can think of is, God grant me the serenity to accept. I said it probably 20 times standing there. You know what I mean? And my dad said he wanted me. I called him, but anyway, he said he was going to give me a ride home, which is 25 miles away. Okay, and I was living with my parents at the time. And anyway, I said, no, I got to go to a meeting. I got to go to a meeting. Even if I have to walk home, I got to go to a meeting. And so we towed the car to a junkyard, and I went to an AA meeting. He went home, and I had to walk most of the way home. But anyway, I went, got a meeting, and that's when I realized, there actually is a difference in me. This program actually is working, and when you practice these principles in all our affairs, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, practicing these principles in all our affairs. When I look at anything that I'm dealing with in life, I try and do it without judgment. That means without condemnation. I'm assessing the truth about what I'm dealing with. And in the second step, I'm asking God's help, you know, and I'm asking for God to help me. And in the third step, I'm asking Him to do those things I can't do, I can't see, I don't even know we're there. You know, I can sometimes I can be worried about some future event and to spend all this time worrying about this future event and get to it and nothing happens the way I thought. Nothing. So I wasted all that time and energy worrying about this event and it never even happened. Never even happened the way I thought. How many times have I done that in my life? Over and over. Wasted days worried about things that never happened. You know? So when I do the fourth step, and that's practicing these principles in all my affairs, I can write down stuff on it, looking at it. I can give it to God. You know what? When I first did my fourth step, I had to give it to God before somebody else. You know why? Because otherwise it was just in my imagination. Otherwise it was just me. But when I wrote it down, it's something physical, something I can touch, something I can see, something I can hear myself reading. So it appeals to all my senses. So when I'm practicing these principles in all my affairs, I try to remember that. You know, that's why we write it down. That's why we tell someone else out loud. It's because it appeals to all my senses. It makes it more real to me. When am I supposed to stop speaking?
That's well.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Anyway, that one came out of left field. But anyway, when I go through, and I'm admitting to God, I try to best my ability live at zero ground. That's what I call it, zero ground. That means there's nothing I haven't admitted to God, and there's no future event that I have not left in His hands. And when I live that way, I'm clean. I can really live today. And I can put all my energy and focus on today because I'm not wasting that energy about some future event. It's all in His hands anyway. He's the only one that can change the future. I can't change the future. I can only change the now. And if I'm not in the now, then I need to leave it in His hands. And so I try to my best to live at zero ground all the time. Sometimes you get caught up in things. Sometimes you might worry about things. And it's like I tell my sponsees all the time, you give it to God, give it to God, and give it to God until you're able to leave it in His hands. Even if it takes 1,001 times, you just keep on giving it to God until you're able to leave it in His hands. Some things are difficult, especially when it comes to grieving and those type of things. It is difficult to give it to God. It takes a while. Sometimes you have to give it to Him over and over. I don't know how many times. Pray about something in the morning. 2 hours later, here I am thinking about it again. Here I am debating on it. Here I am planning. Oh, well, maybe if this happens, that happens. I'm wasting time on this future event that never isn't even, it could be a week or a month or a year away. And I'd be worried about it, thinking about it, wasting my time because I'm not living rightly today. And that's what I want to do. I want to live rightly today. I want to always be God conscious, always practice these principles in all my affairs, and when I go through, I have a written, it's off of the steps, but I have a actually written program which I practice, which is practicing the principles in all my affairs that I go through with anything I'm going through. And I don't have that with me right now, but I didn't think about bringing it. But anyway, I have this program, and the first thing is, the first rule of thumb is without judgment or condemnation of any kind. I'm not here to judge. God's the judge. Let God be the judge. I remember when my first sponsor told me that. Quit playing God. I was judging everyone, myself, everyone else, and we can be super critical of other people. And it's like, but you know what? Sometimes when I'm driving and I'm critical of someone else's driving, sometimes I treat myself worse than that. That should not be. That should not be. Because I can be so critical of my own self, and I need to give myself a break. And it's just like when you're in a long-term relationship. I've been in a relationship with the same woman for 36 years. I'll tell you what, I got to allow her to be her. If I try to dictate her, that ain't going to work. She tries to do that to me, that ain't going to work. I have to let that person be that person. And I have to let myself be myself, and I'm not the judge. He is, you know, and I can let him be that today. Today I get to live, I get to stay sober, I get to love people. I can see inside you, I can see inside a lot of people. And you know what? Doesn't matter. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for you. That's what I do. When I went to school when I was a child, I had 140 minds, all thinking crazy things, and believe me, there is no screening. They will think anything, and so that's what I went through when I first got sober, or when I first went to school, right? And it's the same thing. I can read a lot of things, but the only thing I can do is pray for you. That's it. I'm not going to judge you, condemn you. I've done the same thing myself. So the only thing I can do is pray for you. And I really believe that God gives me insight into others' lives, so I will pray for that person. And I pray for every one of you, and I will again. Thank you.
Danger.